The Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game has been out now for over 20 years in the US, and in that time, the game has changed substantially. One of the clearest areas that it has changed is in its summoning mechanics, as new, innovative ways to play are one of the cornerstones of evolving the game over time. With this in mind, we're going to take a look back over the history of different summoning mechanics in Yu-Gi-Oh!, how they've changed as the game has evolved, and how we've reached where we are today. Nearing the end of 2008, the GX era was coming to an end. While a majority of GX's releases were very much unremarkable, the latter half of the era had basically been marred by overpowered releases left and right. Phantom Darkness had released Dark Armed Dragon into the meta, which had caused serious issues, followed by Light of Destruction bringing Lightsworn and Gladiator beasts. It was clear that the power level of the game was finally going up after stagnating for such a long period. And that was about to become even more apparent, as with the start of the next era of the game, a new summoning mechanic would be introduced to the game for the first time since 2002, and it would completely change how the game evolved moving forward. Before we jump into the video, a huge shout out to our sponsor, Bloodline Heroes of Lithas, bringing some of the most unique mechanics to the gacha experience. Be sure to download the game for free using my link in the description or by scanning the QR code on screen now to receive an amazing starter kit. Bloodline Heroes of Lithas is a hero collector fantasy RPG with impressive 3D realistic designs in which you can build your kingdom and collect champions, not only by summoning them, but also by breeding with other companions and by capturing prisoners and defending the world. Unlike most gacha games, the unique mechanic of marrying and breeding your champions with each other will create powerful hybrid champions, able to generate over 1,000 unique fantasy hybrids that inherit not only the talents and traits of their parents, but also their unique appearances, providing endless possibilities for lineups and matchmaking strategies. Deploy your team of hybrids into a vast and realistic fantasy world, earning points by battling in the seasonal guild wars and by obtaining uniquely designed hybrid champions, Bloodcraft Legends. Raise heirs with companions, build your own kingdom and economy with strategic gameplay, and experience beautiful scenes and interesting storylines. New bloodlines and legendary hybrids are being added to the game constantly, opening endless possibilities for you to find that perfect hybrid to suit your personal playstyle. Download the game for free on both iOS and Android using the link in the description or by scanning the QR code on screen now to receive a special starter pack worth $20, including a summoning crystal, 100,000 gold, and 100 diamonds. And the first 30 players to leave their in-game account ID and username in the replies to the pinned comment below will receive a free legendary female orc champion, Ugrel, one of the best warriors to carry you in the game. Thank you again to Bloodline Heroes of Lithas for sponsoring this video, and without further ado, let's dive in. Unlike the histories of fusions and rituals, which we've covered previously, Synchro was the first new mechanic added to Yu-Gi-Oh! Well after the game's launch. First released in the 5D starter deck in August 2008, and the subsequent main set The Duelist Genesis in September, Synchros were initially seen as a way to remake the fusion and ritual mechanics in a way that was more generically accessible. The experimentation from Gladiator Beasts a couple of sets prior could really be seen as the groundwork being laid for Synchros, taking 2 or more monsters on the field and moving them somewhere else to summon a boss monster from the extra deck. Where Contact Fusion and Synchros differed though was the nuances of the mechanic itself. Synchros required specifically the combination of a tuner and non-tuner monsters whose levels equaled the level of the monster you were summoning by sending the materials to the graveyard. The big change from Contact Fusion though was that the monsters used as materials, outside of requiring a tuner monster, could literally be anything, meaning that any deck that could splash in a tuner monster could access Synchros without changing the core principle of the deck itself. This was most prevalent in the new Psychic type released at the same time, as Krebons was arguably the best generic tuner added here thanks to the other major Psychic support piece, Emergency Teleport, which could special summon out a level 3 or lower Psychic from the deck, allowing you to simply add Krebons to any established board to make Synchro plays with, most commonly for the level 6 Goyo Guardian or the level 8 Stardust Dragon or Colossal Fighter. This would be highlighted in the already popular Dark Armed Dragon deck, or DAD deck, which would add these pieces to form Teledad, one of the most prolific Tier 0 decks of all time, which didn't necessarily use Synchro summoning as its focus, just more as an additional way to put darks in the grave quickly. Synchros in this early stage could literally only get better with new sets releasing, which they did with Crossroads of Chaos in November 2008, releasing the first generic level 7 Synchro in Black Rose Dragon, who could nuke the board on summon, and a new generic tuner in Plague Spreader Zombie, who could revive itself from grave by returning a card from hand to the top of deck, being banished the next time it left the field. With a level 7 option now available, decks running Emergency Teleport now opted to include a copy of Psychic Commander for accessing the odd-numbered lines, giving further diversity to the tool. Another major push would be felt in Crimson Crisis in March 2009, bringing the first synchro-focused archetype in Black Wings. While this initial wave was extremely small, bringing 3 main deck monsters and 1 synchro, Black Wings would grow from here into the first viable synchro archetype thanks to new main deck tools and synchro monsters released in following sets. In the meantime though, their monster Gale the Whirlwind would see play as a generic tuner in practically every deck of the format, as it was a normal summon that cut a monster's attack in half and then could be used to make a synchro after. The other push from this set was the introduction of the Assault Mode series, a set of upgraded synchro monsters that could be summoned by tributing the original with the trap Assault Mode Activate. These Assault Mode variants ended up having absolutely no impact at the time, mostly thanks to the need to summon these monsters with a slow trap and still needing to summon the synchro first to enable it. The last piece from this set worth talking about was the release of Dark Strike Fighter, otherwise known as one of the biggest mistakes ever made for the synchro mechanic as a whole. At the time of release, Dark Strike Fighter had no once per turn restriction and was not locked to main phase 1, meaning it enabled all forms of FTKs and OTKs with its release for the cost of a level 7 synchro. This was such a major issue that it was banned immediately on the next ban list in September 2009, only being eventually released from the list with its current errata. After that war crime, the next set, Raging Battle in May 2009, wouldn't move the needle too far in terms of new advancements, but would bring another wave of support to Black Wings that would make them meta viable, with 4 new main deck monsters, another synchro, and the continuous spell Black Whirlwind, turning Black Wing into a potent threat in the meta, especially with the hits coming down the pipeline to other major meta threats of the time. In the same vein, Ancient Prophecy in September 2009 would bring Vayu the Emblem of Honor, which was notable not just for being further Blackwing support, but also for being the first way to cheat out synchro monsters. Able to banish itself and another Blackwing from grave to special summon a Blackwing synchro with the same total level with its effects negated. The generic synchro pool would explode in viability with the beginning of the Hidden Arsenal series in November 2009, bringing various powerful and generic synchros to the card pool like Bryonic, Catastor, and Mistworm, but also would enable a new synchro strategy in the era with the release of Flamvel Magician, which combined with the previously released Fire Dog and Rekindling enabled a level 8 synchro engine of sorts, being semi-popular in the meta. Similarly, Stardust Overdrive in the same month would give us Quick Draw Synchron, a level 5 tuner that was able to cheat the required tuner requirements of the Warrior Synchro monsters by being able to be considered any Synchron tuner. This was followed by Drill Warrior released in Absolute Power Force in February 2010, and led to the popularity of the deck Quick Draw Dandy Warrior in the format. This format environment would lay the groundwork for the exceedingly popular Edison format, which has since exploded in popularity, being considered the quintessential synchro format, and that's mostly because of what was about to follow. The next release of the 5Ds era would do more than just push the needle again. It was about to speed up the format to a nearly unrecognizable level to what came before. A few months later in May 2010, The Shining Darkness would release, and with it would come a slew of new additions to the card pool that would significantly change the speed of the game forever. Synchro-wise though, there were 3 major points here, being Infernity, X-Saber, and Plants. Infernity would make its mark here as the new era synchro deck with the release of Beetle, Mirage, Doom Dragon, Launcher, and Barrier, all of which would combine with the previously released Archfiend and Necromancer to form the deck Infernity in the meta, able to loop through their lines at a rapid pace to make Doom Dragon backed up with 2 to 3 copies of Infernity Barrier by the end. The speed at which this deck could accomplish this far outpaced any of the decks of the previous formats, which was also spurred further by the new X-Saber pieces. X-Saber received Dark Soul and Bogart Knight, which gave new ways for X-Saber to search and swarm with. Specifically, Bogart Knight's ability to summon an additional X-Saber triggered the previous pieces to come together, with Fall Troll's condition now able to be fulfilled by a single normal summon. And Dark Soul provided the searching power to enable this, especially since on release, he was misruled to trigger in the end phase for every time he was sent to the grave that turn rather than just once. The last of these important pushes was Spore, which could be slotted into decks already playing a Dandelion package to provide easier synchro access and tribute fodder with its revival effect, easily enabled by Lone Fire Blossom, which was a staple at this stage. Following this, Duelist Revolution in August 2010 would bring yet another massive push to the speeding up of the metagame with staples that would be paramount to formats for the next few years. but one of the biggest pushes it made was in the revitalization of hand traps with effect Veiler, a level 1 tuner that could be discarded to negate an opponent's monster's effects during their turn. Veiler would turn the hand trap concept from being exclusively battle tricks into true forms of interaction with this, followed soon after by Max C a few months later. But it was also a tuner for decks that weren't synchro focused at this stage to potentially reach outs in their extra decks that they wouldn't have otherwise. In addition to this, Scrap Dragon was another excellent level 8 target added here, able to pop a card on each field once per turn, slotting into many extra decks instantly. Lastly, the concept of Synchro Fusions was pushed here with Draco a Quest, Ultimate Axon Kicker, and Miracle Synchro Fusion. But this concept would fall flat hard due to the payoffs being undesirable win more cards, failing to be the next evolution of the mechanic. The true next evolution of Synchro Summoning would be in Starstrike Blast in November 2010, bringing the introduction of Excel Synchros, otherwise known as Synchros created using other Synchros. This concept would be headlined by the new monsters Formula Synchron, a level 2 tuner Synchro that draws a card on summon and can Synchro summon using itself on the opponent's turn, and Shooting Star Dragon, a Synchro requiring Stardust Dragon and a tuner Synchro, usually Formula Synchron, who can negate a destruction effect once per turn, could attack up to 5 times depending on reveals for its effect, and can banish itself until the end of the turn to negate an attack. Shooting Star would see little to no play, but Formula would see experimentation in decks already using level 1 pieces, specifically those using the plant package with Dandelion. Speaking of, the other major contribution from this release was Glow Up Bulb, a level 1 plant tuner that could revive itself once per duel by milling a card, instantly slotting itself into the plant package and making it far more explosively viable. Pushing the idea of Synchro Chains further, Hidden Arsenal 3 in December 2010 would bring new pieces of the previously established Dragoonity archetype in Dux and Phalanx, the former of which could equip a Dragoonity from grave to itself on summon, and the latter could special summon itself if considered as an equipped spell. Phalanx in particular was the piece needed to turn Dragoonity into a synchro spamming threat, able to make Vajrayana re-equip the Phalanx, and use its effect to access level 8 synchros off of a normal summon of Dux, cementing the idea of synchro climbing into the public consciousness. Similarly to Shining Darkness, Storm of Ragnarok, released in February 2011, brought yet another game-warpingly strong synchro strategy to the forefront in Six Samurai, giving them new key monsters like Kagemusha, Kizan, Kaigeki, Shinai, Mizuho, Inishi, and their boss monster Shien, a level 5 synchro that can negate a spell or trap once per turn. This was entirely enabled by the previously released continuous spell Gateway of the Six, which gained 2 counters per 6 Samurai summon and could remove 4 from the board to search or recur a 6 Samurai monster. This meant if you had either 2 Gateway or 1 Gateway and 2 other counter generators, you had an endless stream of monsters to summon and use for various play lines, usually resulting in multiple Shien on the first turn, which was devastating in this time period. This was also the time when Max C was first released, so there was some counterplay, but it was a sign of Synchro speeding up even further, which was only pushed even further by the next set. Hidden Arsenal 4 was released in April 2011, and with it came the new boss monster of Synchro Summoning, Trishula, who banished a card from the opponent's hand, field, and grave on summon, being one of the strongest summons in the game, going second for board breaking and going first for hand ripping. Rounding out the era, Extreme Victory released in May 2011, and it would be focused on the TG archetype, which was entirely focused on the previously established idea of Excel Synchros with their boss monster Halberd Cannon, who could negate a summon once per turn. TG itself wouldn't be particularly powerful outside of stun strategies, but there was a card here that did revolutionize synchro climbing in its own way. Reborn Tengu, when removed from the field, summoned another copy of itself from deck, not optional and couldn't miss timing. While this was an important piece for stun and monarch strategies, Synchros benefited heavily from this release as you could use it for material and instantly replace itself without the worry of missing activation timing. With this release, the 5Ds era came to an end and Synchros were put on the back burner for the next mechanic, similarly to how fusions were going into the 5Ds era. However, just because they were no longer the main focus did not mean the end for Synchros, as the following eras would reinvent the concept multiple times over to form the mechanic we all know and love today. As we enter the Zexal era and Exceed monsters take the spotlight, Synchros would only get a couple of news to pieces at first through promo releases, but the 2 promos we got completely redefined certain pieces of the mechanic. TG Hyper Librarian was the first of these in June and July of 2011, becoming the quintessential Synchro combo enabler on release, letting the owner draw a card every time a monster is Synchro summoned. This combined with chain-enabling Synchros like Formula Synchron, who also let you draw a card on summon, enabled various Synchro climbing strategies that took over the discourse surrounding the mechanic as a whole, which was only pushed further with the release of Shooting Quasar Dragon in December 2011. A level 12 Excel Synchro requiring at least 3 total monsters that could attack a number of times up to the number of non-tuner materials used, and had an Omni Negate, replacing itself with Shooting Star Dragon when it leaves the field. At this point in time, Omni Negates were almost never included on boss monsters, making Quasar's effect worth the potential investment, leading to the popularity of Quasar Turbo decks thanks to the draw power provided from Hyper Librarian and Formula Synchron, who themselves provided 2 of the 3 materials to make Quasar, leaving only a level 5 Synchro to complete the climb. Beyond this, Synchros received no real pushes in support for over a year until the release of Cosmo Blazer in January 2013, where 2 things would happen. The first of these was the release of Fire Fist, the first relevant archetype in the era that utilized Synchro summoning in any capacity, with Spirit, a level 3 tuner that revived the level 3 200 or less defense fire monster on normal summon, and Horse Prince, a level 6 Synchro that special summoned a level 3 fire from deck on summon. These would be the key pieces of 3 and 3.5 axis Fire Fist, with the eventual release of Fire Fist Rooster. The other push from this set was the release of Crimson Blader, the first generic Synchro released in a main set since the 5Ds era, a level 8 that locked summoning of level 5 or higher monsters the turn after it destroys something in battle, which would also hold incredible significance moving into Dragon Ruler format, as it could be made with a glow-up bulb and any Dragon Ruler, giving a way to lock the opponent out of their Dragon Ruler pieces. Similarly, released in Judgment of the Light in August 2013, we received 2 more generic Synchros, being Armades, a level 5 who stuns responses when it attacks, and Star Eater, a level 11 whose summon cannot be responded to and who's unaffected by cards while attacking. Armades would be an important piece of the extra decks of the near future, but Star Eater found a home in Dragon Ruler variants after their initial hits once they added in level 4 tuners like Debris Dragon. A couple more Synchros would be added to the pool through Vulcan the Divine in October and Stardust Spark Dragon in November 2013, and a few others would be sprinkled in through the rest of the era, like Leo, Keeper of the Sacred Tree in Legacy of the Valiant in January, Beals the Diabolic Dragon in Premium Gold in March, and Michael the Arc Lightswarm in the Realm of Light structure deck in June 2014. But for the most part, relevant Synchro pushes were obsolete in the face of massive waves being given to Exceed at this point in time. With the Zexal era coming to a close, many expected the next era to once again push the previous mechanic to the back burner to make way for the new one. But something was changing this time. The next era of the game wouldn't just forget Exceed, it would take it, along with Synchro and Fusion, and breathe new life into the stagnant mechanics in interesting ways. I don't think it's controversial at this point to make the claim that Duelist Alliance of September 2014 completely changed the game forever. In this one set, Fusions, Synchros, and Exceeds were completely revitalized to be playable in new and interesting ways through the set's headlining archetypes, with Fusions receiving Shaddoll and Exceeds receiving Tellarknights, and even Burning Abyss was released here, which was mostly focused on Exceed but had peeks into other mechanics too. Synchro's big archetype revival here was Yang Zing, a series of the newly released worm-type monsters who replaced themselves on being destroyed and gave effects to their Synchro monsters based on what was used as material. This culminated in their boss monster Baxia, who shuffled cards into deck on summon up to the number of different attributes used to summon it, and allowed you to pop a card you control to revive a level 4 or lower monster, which cycled the Yang Zing destruction effects. As the dust from this release settled, Yang Zing would fall off relatively quickly in the new landscape thanks to the over-tuning of Shaddoll and Burning Abyss in the meta. But Synchro would live on in the format thanks to tuners and other archetypes also released here, like Falco and Shaddoll and Thelis and Lightsworn. The new challengers would follow in November 2014, and with it, Burning Abyss would get their Synchro pieces in Rubik, the in-archetype tuner, which was a lot more important for Burning Abyss due to their destruction conditions requiring only Burning Abyss monsters on the field, and Virgil, a level 6 Synchro that could discard a Burning Abyss to spin a card on field or engrave into deck, and drew a card on destruction. This would immediately see play in Burning Abyss, already one of the better decks of the format, only boosting them up further to match with Shaddoll. The format would move from here to essentially one deck representing each mechanic, with Shaddolls having Fusion, Burning Abyss having Exceed, and to a much lesser extent Synchro, Cliffort having the new Pendulum mechanic and Tribute summons, and the new Necros with Rituals. The inclusion of Synchro at this point for BA was much more of a footnote, leading to the mechanic falling far behind all of the others for the time being, but that didn't mean they received nothing in this period. Ultimaya Zulkin was released as a promo card for Shonen Jump in April 2015, able to be summoned by sending a tuner and non-tuner of the same level of 5 or higher to the grave, able to cheat out any level 7 or 8 dragon-type synchro once per turn when you set a spell or trap. At the time, this was mostly irrelevant, as the most notable target being the new Clearwing Synchro Dragon, but would eventually pop back up from time to time with better targets. With the previous format slowing down from hits on the ban list, Synchro would slowly rise back up into a niche position in the meta thanks to Clash of Rebellions in August 2015, bringing Luster Pendulum the Draco Slayer, a level 4 Pendulum tuner who could only be used to Synchro summon a Draco Slayer monster like Ignister Prominence, who could summon a Draco Slayer from deck once per turn and could pop a Pendulum to spin a card back into deck once per turn. These two pieces would become integral to the success of the upcoming Pepe and eventual Draco Pals deck, being one of the strongest synchros in the game for some time after this. A few months after this, a new side set, High Speed Riders, would bring an odd new archetype to the game called Psyframes, a series of psychic tuners that could summon themselves to an empty board alongside Psyframe Driver to negate the activation of a card from the opponent, the most used of which was Gamma. At the time, they were not seen for the hand trap threats they'd eventually be known for. Rather, they were almost exclusively seen for their synchro monster Psyframe Lord Omega, who could banish itself in a random card from the opponent's hand on a quick effect and, if on the field in the opponent's standby phase, could return a banished card to the grave, also able to cycle itself back from grave to extra deck by returning a card from the grave to the deck. Omega was immediately noted for having serious potential as a level 8 generic synchro, as hand ripping and banished recursion was extremely useful at this stage, especially with the release of Breakers of Shadow in 2016. While this set's cultural significance was mostly dominated by Pepe's Tier 0 reign here, Bosch also brought a new unique synchro archetype in Shiranui, a series of zombie monsters focused around the main tuner Spectral Sword, who could banish itself and a Shiranui engraved to special summon a synchro from the extra deck with the same total level, similar to Vayu in the past. This deck would eventually come to be part of the meta thanks to Omega recurring their banished pieces and the release of the upcoming card That Grass Looks Greener, although was mostly forgotten about due to being sandwiched between two oppressive Tier 0 formats in Pepe and Zoo, which started in the exact same set that released Grass. Synchro would finally take a main stage presence again with the release of Shining Victories in May 2016, bringing Blue Eyes Spirit Dragon, a level 9 synchro requiring a Blue Eyes monster, which was poised to directly counter the meta of the time of Pendulums and Burning Abyss with its Floodgate and Negation effects. The set also brought Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, which became the go-to summon target of Zulkin, able to negate an effect once per turn and gain the attack of any level 5 or higher at battles, being one of the best targets to summon with Zulkin due to its restrictive summoning conditions. This would be even more apparent with the release of the Dark Illusion in August 2016, bringing Coral Dragon, who became the go-to level 6 tuner for Zulkin's summon, able to discard 1 to pop a card and drew 1 on being sent to grave. It also released Gofu the Vague Shadow, but this was hardly used for actual synchro plays, rather for its token generation in the next era. Invasion Vengeance would soon follow in November 2016, bringing a new piece of support to the previous Yang Xing archetype in Denglong, a level 5 synchro tuner that searched a Yang Xing card on summon, most commonly being used to search for 9 pillars of the Yang Xing, which could turn any level 5 synchro access into a free Omni Negate that spun back when you negated. This was quickly recognized as one of the most powerful plays you could make using a level 5 synchro, marking Denglong a staple in many extra decks thereafter, and eventually resulting in the card's ban due to its ease of use. The other synchro here was Vermilion Dragon Mech, a level 9 that could banish a tuner in grave to pop a card on field, recycling a banished tuner when destroyed by card effect. This saw play almost immediately in Blue Eyes decks thanks to its level 9 nature and the ability to recycle used white stones, but would remain one of the better level 9 targets for some time after. Unfortunately, the relevant wave of synchro support would begin to dry up near the end of the era with the release of Raging Tempest in February 2017. As the most relevant support we received here was Sea Monster of Theseus, a fusion tuner that was summonable with instant fusion, and the Wind Witches, which would see rogue level success with the artifacts and the Invoked engine, but nothing massive due to the Tier 0 Zodiac format. This would round out the Arc 5 era, leading into the VRAINS era, and subsequently the effective kneecapping of the synchro mechanic as a whole. As we enter into the VRAINS era, a major shift happened thanks to the Master Rule change that accompanied Link monsters, making it so that any monster being summoned from the extra deck needed to be either summoned to the extra monster zone, or to a zone one of the new Link monsters pointed to. This effectively kneecapped everything that Synchro could do at this stage, as a majority of Synchro focused strategies were based on the concept of Synchro climbing, which is exceedingly more difficult now that you could only have out one Synchro at a time without the usage of Link monsters. With the release of Code of the Duelist in August 2017, almost everything would take a backseat to Links for the time being, but that didn't mean that Synchro received nothing at all. Supreme King Dragon Clearwing was a new Synchro intended for pendulum strategies, able to nuke opponents' monsters on summon and destroyed anything it battled before that battle occurred. This would immediately be slotted into the previously released Pendulum Magician deck with Harmonizing and White-Wing Magicians to provide the tuner for its summon, seeing decent play even with the changes to the extra deck. Following this in Circuit Break in October 2017, we would also receive the tuner Destrudo the Lost Dragon's Frisian, who when combined with Dragon's Ravine essentially turned any monster into Ancient Fairy Dragon, who could then pop the Ravine to search for another field spell, also providing a free special summon from the hand. It was also used with Yazi to provide access into Mare, who provided a ton of tokens for your Link summons. Destrudo was widely recognized as one of the best, if not the absolute best, tuner in the game with these interactions, with its only real competition at this stage being Gofu the Vague Shadow for its Link spam interactions. There were attempts to bring Synchros back into the meta without making them just into combo pieces for other decks, such as FAs receiving their first Synchro in Extreme Force in February 2018, and Shooting Riser and Junk Speeder released as a Shonen Jump promo and in the Mega Tins in August 2018. But neither of these sets would make Synchros playable outside of specific combos with Link monsters. Even new archetypes using Synchros in new ways, like Mayakashi from Hidden Summoners in November 2018, an archetype of zombies that use their tuners to climb repeatedly into higher and higher Synchros to set up a chain of events for the following turns, did nothing. Synchro's next big push into the metagame wouldn't come until Savage Strike in February 2019, where we'd receive Borreload Savage Dragon, a level 8 Synchro that equips a Link monster from Grave on summon, gaining attack and once per turn Omni Negates based on that monster's Link rating. This was used more so as an ending piece of Link combo decks, as access to a level 8 Synchro gave any deck with Link access an Omni Negate, similarly to how Danglong operated, only not needing to use the main deck brick. This was followed by Dark Neostorm in May 2019, which brought Ib the World Chalice Justiciar, a level 5 Synchro that searched a World Legacy card on summon and summoned a World Chalice monster from deck when sent to grave. These effects, along with her status as a tuner monster, made Ib one of the strongest combo enablers in the game, able to generate at minimum +1 in card advantage simply by summoning her. With Ib's release, Synchros for the time being were solidified as an engine for advantage generation, not as a go-to strategy for the time being, even with more powerful Synchro tools being added, like Rocket Tracer and Rocket Revolt in August 2019, Math Mech and Mystic Fighters in November 2019, and Plunder Patrol and Ignition Assault in January 2020, all of which had Synchro pieces in their strategies, but weren't Synchro strategies themselves. The idea of using Synchro pieces as engine fodder would come to a head with the release of Dual Overload in March 2020, with the release of Crystron Halqifibrax, a Link monster that summons a level 3 tuner from deck on summon and can banish itself on the opponent's turn to summon any tuner Synchro from the extra deck as a Synchro summon. This is instantly abused as a combo enabler alongside various tuners like O-Lion, Jet Synchron, and Deskbot 001, to combo into various other monsters, most prominently Auroradon, which could then use the advantage generated by the tuners in Grave to continue into Synchros for combo extension. The first real viable Synchro strategy in ages would finally be released with Secret Slayers in April 2020, being Adamancipator, a series of rock monsters that excavate cards from the top of the deck to swarm the board for Synchro summons. This was also heavily abusable thanks to Block Dragon, who added up to 3 rock monsters to hand when sent from field to grave, which was a simple task for the archetype. Adamancipator would go from here to be one of the most represented decks of the format, which was only helped by the end of the era, as with the transition into the 7th era of the game, another Master Rule update was set to shift some strength back into Synchro's corner. With the release of Rise of the Duelist in August 2020, the 7th era of Yu-Gi-Oh! Began, marked with the reverting of many of the changes brought forward in the VRAINS era to the Master Rules. Fusions, Synchros, and Exceed monsters no longer had to be summoned to the extra monster zone or to zones the Link monster points to, while the restriction was still present for Links and Pendulums. With this change, Synchro strategies would slowly creep back into the metagame, starting with the release of Infernoble Knight, a spin-off of the previous Noble Knights archetype that focused on fire warriors able to equip to other fire warriors on the field through various methods. The other major release here was Chaos Ruler, a level 8 dragon synchro that milled 5 cards on summon, adding a lighter dark milled this way to hand, and able to revive itself from grave by banishing a light and darkened grave. Chaos Ruler would become an integral piece of various strategies, like Dragon Link, providing milling power and a recurring body for combo lines, being one of the most valuable staple synchros for a time. Following this was Phantom Rage, released in November 2020, which brought the Virtual World archetype, a series of level 3 and 6 Psychic and Worms that combo with each other to make levels and rank 3, 6, and 9 synchros and exceeds. Synchro-wise, this culminated into Yugioh, a level 6 that could banish 2 of the same type and attribute from grave to send a card on field to grave, and had destruction protection while there are 2 matching type and attribute monsters in grave, and Shen, a level 9 that banished anything sent from field to grave, could return a banished card to grave when a monster attacked, and could revive itself by banishing 2 monsters with different types and attributes from grave. Virtual World would slowly become one of the most relevant strategies in the game thanks to their access to the level 9 synchros, which could easily be comboed into the powerful True King of all calamities. Almost a year later would be the next big synchro push, being Baronne de Fleur and Legendary Duelist Synchro Storm in October 2021, being a level 10 that provides a one-time Omni Negate, a once per turn targeted pop, and a tag out effect to revive any monster in grave during the standby phase by returning itself to the extra deck. Baronne would quickly become the most powerful level 10 synchro in the game, and from that position, a staple in the overall game with the release of Burst of Destiny in November 2021, which brought the Sword Soul archetype. Sword Soul is a series of worms that had effects that spawned a token tuner, which could then be used with the various monsters to make level 8 and 10 synchros easily, slotting Baronne into the archetype without issue. The other synchro released here was Cupid Pitch, a level 4 synchro that modulates its level up or down on summon based on the level of the tuner used, and searched a 600 defense monster when sent to grave for synchro summon. This was commonly used with Hulk engines to turn the link pieces into an easy Borreload Savage Dragon, using the level modulation and Auroradon tokens, even netting a search in decks that could manage it. This would become far more common with the release of Grand Creators in January 2022, with the release of the Punk archetype, a series of level 3 psychics and level 8s of other various types which comboed off each other to make level 11 synchros, but more commonly at the time would be used to easily access Halqifibrax off a single copy of either Xiamen or Emergency Teleport. Eventually, synchros would be introduced back into the archetype with Deer Note a few months later, but the main use of Punk Engine for the time was specifically Halqifibrax and eventually Chaos Ruler until both were banned. Lastly, for our current knowledge is Visa Starfrost, released in Dimension Force in May 2022, meant to be a pseudo-connecting factor between a variety of different archetypes surrounding different summoning mechanics, like links with Scareclaw, fusions with Tearlaments, and Exceed with Kashtira. The final archetype of these, releasing in Cyberstorm Access in May, will be Manadome, a series of level 2 fairy tuners that specialize in synchro summoning their boss monster, Primeheart, using any number of tuners and one non-tuner light monster, who is able to attack up to the number of tuners used to summon it, gains targeting protection if summoned with a Manadome tuner, and floats into Vsauce Starfrost or a 1500 attack and 2100 defense monster in grave or banished when it leaves the field by an opponent's card. And with that, we're all caught up to the present metagame, and then some. Looking back on it, Synchro seemed to have received a bit of shortchanging in many eras when it came to supporting the mechanic compared to others like Fusion and Exceed, but that seems to be finally changing in the current era with various Synchro support pushes that have come down the pipeline in the last few years. Hopefully we continue to see not only new and innovative ways to use the Synchro mechanic, but all of the summoning mechanics, as treating them all as equals is how we get to some of our most diverse and fun formats in the game's history. A big shout out and thank you to Prinrin, Ryza339, and all of my other patrons over on Patreon. If you'd like to see my videos a day early, consider supporting me on Patreon, link in the description below. If you like this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe below. It really does help me out. If you want more info for the behind the scenes for these, be sure to follow me on Twitter, check out my Twitch streams, or join my Discord server. All links are down in the description below. Thank you all again, and I'll see you next time.